renaming Facebook, aren't I? All right, the President has launched a National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. It's going to advise him on matters related to fighting corruption, of course, including the recommendations by the State Capture Commission. Publicly nominated people from civil society, academia, business and labour are making up the council. There's quite a list of names. They're going to serve a 3-year term, which is beginning shortly. When I say shortly, let's find out how shortly. Chairperson of the council, it's Professor Firoz Cachalia. I'm sure you all know the name. Professor Cachalia, good to have you. You're joining me on the telephone this morning. I do appreciate your time. 3 years, that's not much time, some would say, to get on top of corruption. Where in the world do you begin? Good morning.
Good morning, Gareth, and good morning to your listeners. Look, corruption is a very serious matter in our country. We need to address this question, this challenge, to defend democracy and to defend the public interest over the long term. So I think it's in that context that the establishment of this advisory body, and that should be understood, it doesn't have enforcement powers. It has been established to advise the President. Yes, who knows how much progress we will have made in 3 years. But the important point is, I think, that this body, in its advisory capacity, has a number of functions which hopefully can make some difference over time. First of all, because it has the responsibility to monitor the implementation of a strategy adopted by the Cabinet 2 years ago. So to the extent that it's going to utilize its expertise to offer government and the presidency an independent perspective, because I served in government. Any kind of decision-making processes, decision makers can become fairly insular. So I think it's important. This sounding board, this advisory body, this monitoring body, can play an important role to bring to the attention of the presidency, of ministers, of senior officials, matters that civil society and other stakeholders considers to be important in fighting corruption.
Professor Cachalia, has the President given the Council any list of names to go for? What is the sector that you start with? Is it corruption within government, within Parliament, within political spheres, the banking spheres? Surely there's a list. If you're set to get underway tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, there must be a list that you need to start with. There must be a priority. What's number one priority for the Council?
So the Council is meeting tomorrow for the first time. We've just been appointed. So tomorrow's meeting will be a kind of a meeting to introduce ourselves and to begin setting some kind of agenda. That agenda includes the implementation of considering and then dealing with the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. So, as you're aware, there are a long list of recommendations. I've asked the presidency to detail those recommendations. We will have to consider that long list and decide what our priorities are going to be based on our expertise, based on our interaction with civil society. And that's where I think the main value potentially of this council will lie, that we are going to create an interface between the public and civil society on the one hand and government on the other to prioritize anti-corruption as part of the government's agenda.
Would you like to see the council in the end being able to advise the president on who should be behind bars for corruption, Prof? You were just talking about how devastating corruption is to society and our country's economy. Could you go as far? Would you have the powers? Would you have the authority to recommend arrests for certain individuals or for prosecution against companies?
So we need to be clear about this. We have investigative and prosecuting authorities that have the responsibility to investigate criminal corruption, to arrest individuals, prosecute them, and so forth. The mandate of this advisory council mainly focuses on policy and prevention. So it's about identifying, for instance, gaps in the current legislative framework. We may, for instance, need to review, in the light of the Zondo Commission's recommendations, whether our current legislation is adequate for the purposes of protecting whistleblowers, for instance. So the Advisory Council is not an investigative or prosecuting body. But I do think that it will fall within the mandate of the advisory body to make recommendations on any area of the entire infrastructure, anti-corruption infrastructure that needs attention, which would include building capacity in those arms of the state.
Would you be working closely with, for example, the Hawks, any of the other anti-corruption bodies? What's the relationship going to look like? Who reports to who, or is it still a separation of powers? Would you be having any conversation with, for example, the Hawks to see what investigations they're working on, getting their information so you can take that professor as a council and take that to the president? I'm just trying to understand, is there an overlap of powers and influence here?
So that's a question that the Advisory Council is going to have to clarify, right? What is our relationship between other components of the anti-corruption infrastructure? I think what's important for the public to understand is that fighting corruption requires a multifaceted, comprehensive strategy which has many components. And among the questions, therefore, that we are going to have to address will include what our relationship is going to be with other components of the anti-corruption fight.
Yeah, but there's two names that come to mind, obviously, Professor, and obviously we'll follow up once the first sitting has taken place. The NPA is obviously one of them. There's the Hawks, of course, and the Special Investigating Unit. But as you say, it's going to get hammered out. That's going to get hammered out tomorrow. Professor, I'm going to say thank you very much for the moment, Mr. Cachalia. Professor Cachalia, we run out of time for the moment, but you've given us a sense of what exactly this Anti-Corruption Advisory Council is going to look like, but it does have to fit in what some are calling the Jenga of corruption fighting in our country. We'll hear, no doubts, I'm sure, from the good Professor Firoz Cachalia, if not tomorrow, then in the days to come after they have sat for their first meeting. My thanks to the good Prof.